Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Mastering Modern Attachments in eDiscovery. This is part of our ongoing webinar series here at BlueStar Case Solutions. This is a CLE-accredited webinar, and we will provide CLE credit details and instructions at the end of the session. We are going to have time for Q&A at the end. During the course of the presentation, however, please feel free to drop questions and comments into the Q&A, and we will do our best to entertain those questions throughout the course of the webinar, and we'll certainly try to get to them all at the end. My name is Scott Collister. I'm a consultant with BlueStar Case Solutions, and I'll be your moderator for today's sessions. We're excited to delve into this exciting and infectious problem that we have here in eDiscovery. As cloud-based collaboration tools like Microsoft 365 and Google have become the norm, eDiscovery and legal professionals now have new challenges and risks when it comes to collecting and analyzing what we call modern attachments. You may know them by other names such as cloud attachments or hyperlinked files, but we like the phrase modern attachments. Our session today will provide practical solutions, legal insights, and best practices to keep you ahead of the curve. Oh, excuse me. I would like to introduce our two stellar panelists. I have had the pleasure of knowing both of these individuals for over 20 years, both of whom are well known in the profession. I want to introduce first Rocky Messing. Rocky, welcome.
Hello. Thank you, Scott. Good to be here.
Rocky's a recognized leader in the eDiscovery industry, bringing over 25 years. Is it more than that, Rocky? Is it just 25?
Yeah, we'll go with 25. It's close enough.
20 years of experience in global compliance and technology strategy, working with both service providers and software development. In 2022, he co-founded Altorney, an on-demand platform that simplifies the sourcing and management of document review, giving legal teams the tools to quickly find, schedule, and oversee reviewers with ease. I am a satisfied customer. Just FYI. Prior to founding Altorney, Rocky was a senior program manager at Microsoft in the corporate external and legal affairs department, where he managed and promoted advanced technology solutions for the eDiscovery team. Before that, he spent 4 years in the Office 365 Information Protection product group, helping develop eDiscovery, data governance, and compliance features. Rocky has held key leadership roles throughout his career, including as part of the Equivio, management team, a founding team member at Discover Ready, and managing eDiscovery at RLS. He began his career at Merrill Corporation and currently serves as an advisory board member for ACIDS and EDRM. Welcome again, Rocky.
Thank you.
You are over legal tech. You're rested. You're refreshed, ready to go.
We are well rested. Got lots of sleep post legal week, and ready to give some informative information today. So, thanks for having me here.
Thanks for being here.
Information.
Not just informative.
Joining him is Sarah Thompson. Sarah is the Chief Product Officer at BlueStar Case Solutions and the founder of Seamly LLC. Sarah was a finalist for the 2024 Relativity, Artificial Intelligence Innovation Award. She's a leading authority on AI applications in the legal field, Microsoft 365 legal compliance, and defensible ESI preservation and collection. She has over 20 years of experience, and she pioneered the first forensically sound remote computer and cloud collection platform and the first legal hold integration into Microsoft 365's eDiscovery platform. Quite a feat. Sarah leads the development of BlueStar's next-gen AI solutions, as well as working on our Microsoft 365-based legal investigation platform called Seamly. Sarah has held product leadership roles at renowned companies like iConnect, Dataflight, LexisNexis, and is approved, and holds a BS in computer science from the University of Western Ontario in Canada. Together, Rocky and Sarah will guide us through today's content with a mix of real-world insights, technical know-how, and hopefully a little fun with a unique perspective to take a look at this matter.
Sounds
So,
good.
welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. The introduction. So let's get to it.
Let's get to it. Modern attachments.
Yep.
What are they and why should we care? Rocky, let's start with you. Tell us about modern attachments.
Yeah, so modern attachments have been the talk of the eDiscovery world for really the last 2 to 3 years, as people have realized just some of the complications and so some of the need to look at what is happening from a technology standpoint and how we deal with these different data types in eDiscovery. But let's first start with what are they for anyone who's really not truly familiar, and kind of what the history of modern attachments are. So modern attachments are when I have a document, doesn't matter if it's an Excel file, a Word document, a Google Sheet, something that is sitting out in storage somewhere. It could be in OneDrive, SharePoint, in Google Docs, Google Drive, wherever it might be. And in a email or in a chat conversation or in some other form of communication, rather than physically attaching the document or the item to that conversation or to that email, instead, we are making reference to it. So we are putting a pointer back to wherever it is stored, and the users who are part of that conversation or part of that email thread have access to that attachment. So first of all, why? Why does such a thing exist? You know, it was developed by Google and Microsoft, and it has nothing to do with eDiscovery. Although we like in the industry to think that everything has to do with eDiscovery, and that we should be thinking about eDiscovery from at all times when these new technologies are developed. I can tell you it was absolutely not a part of the original conversation or consideration at all. It really came down to 2 different things. Number one is from the user perspective, how do we make users more productive? And when we send attachments back and forth and we're constantly having to edit it and then send the new version, we've all been there where we're working on the wrong version, right? You're working on a Word document that's being collaborated on, and all of a sudden you realize that someone else made 3 other edits, but to a totally different document, and now you've got 2 different versions of that going back and forth through email or through the chat or whatever it is. So when the technology caught up and really enabled users to be able to collaborate in the same document at the same time, then it made sense that instead of sending that document via email, keep it in the platform, in the storage platform where it could be collaborated on, and allow users to just reference that file. And it does version control and all of the other fancy things that we're able to see what others are editing. That was number one. Number two, though, was costs. You know, we all like to think that storage is immense and it's free, and we can put as much stuff in storage as we want. But especially when it comes to Exchange, the more storage that's being utilized, the more it impacts the overall performance on the machines and on the servers that are running Exchange and running Gmail and all the other platforms and Teams and Google Chat and everything else. So in order to try to reduce the storage impact and the footprint of these tools, if we could reference the files where they are and not actually have to store them within the Exchange environment, within the Google environment, email environment, it actually makes those tools much more performant and lowers the overall cost of running those tools by Google, by Microsoft as they're offering them as services. So that's kind of where this all came about, the little bit of the history of modern attachments. And now, Sarah, maybe let's talk about, so why do we care?
I mean, we're here, so I think we do, right? So modern attachment, right? It's an attachment, but it's not. So it's kind of an antiquated concept to think of, just a document attached to an email as being an attachment. When we're communicating and sending files, as we used to have to do with, attaching that file, we're now doing it with these links. Okay. And so we're doing it in many ways. It could be a link to, as Rocky said, a SharePoint site, a SharePoint file, or OneDrive file, or a Google Drive file, but it could also be a URL, just, it's a link, right? But we're going to focus today on, the attachment part being and actually being a file. So this is how we're communicating, right? And why do we care? It's like, well, if you care about attachments at all, if the documents matter to your matter, then they matter. That's, I mean, if that's clear. And so,
sure.
I think it's always, I remember, Scott mentioned that we did the first integration to Microsoft 365's eDiscovery legal hold, and that was with Rocky. It's one of the projects we worked on many years ago. And even then, the question was, we were collecting and preserving data in Microsoft. It was like, well, what about those pesky links that are in those emails? How do we get them? It's like, for a long time we've ignored them, but they've been there for forever, since 365, the cloud solutions came about. So the only reason we care now is that more people are using them as part of their productivity. And as Rocky mentioned, he was at Microsoft. He's like, we didn't build this for legal. We built this for people to do their work. And this is how people are working now. So that's why it matters more, right? And I think that's why it cannot no longer be ignored. So I think that's some of the importance. As in doing investigations into these into different matters and different litigation, there's so much good stuff in a modern attachment that don't exist in regular attachments that we're really going to show you in a little bit, but I just want to discuss a little bit about kind of why. When you send somebody a file, like, you're not getting the good stuff like, well, who modified this file ever? Like, who created this file? When was it last modified? When were changes made by a particular individual? So, for instance, if you have, situations where you fear that somebody has, like, modified any kind of evidence, you can tell you can go into the metadata, into the versioning of a modern attachment, and actually see exactly what happened when and who did what. So it's much more rich in terms of metadata. So when you're doing an investigation, this is really, really cool stuff, right? This is where you want to look. But also, we had a question in the chat about, can you send somebody a modern attachment and then, prevent them from downloading it? And, this is again why it's important for eDiscovery. Yes, you can. So most organizations, when you're sending one of these files with a link, you can specify in your sharing access, whether it's Microsoft or Google or whatever, don't let the person download it. Make it be like, don't let them modify it. So you give them read-only access. So you give them, like, allow them to do whatever they want. So you really can kind of do a lot of permission setting there. And, we have organizations where we're kind of like, okay, people leave. How do I know what they shared with these, what we call anonymous links? So you can actually share a document from your organization in some cases, if the permissions aren't set on the org level, and the organization itself, won't know who's looking at it, downloading it, using that link, and that kind of stuff. So we actually, go in and look, saying, okay, this guy left, we think he's up to no good. What external sharing, what anonymous external sharing has he done, and to which files? So you can say, he's trying to steal that data. So that's kind of like, really just kind of, I blah, it's a little too long there, but there's a lot of great stuff in there. Metadata is really awesome, and it really gives you a good insight in an investigation into what happened when, and what they were looking at and how they looked at it. It's kind of very important. Okay.
Yeah, Sarah, just to add on to that from a security standpoint, just to be crystal clear, this does, the use of modern attachments does absolutely increase the security profile and lower the risk profile of a corporation, because What it's really doing when I sent, I'm at Altorney, you're at BlueStar, I send you an email with a top secret attachment. I could put rights management on it and try to control it that way, but if you forward it over, if you do something else to it, someone's going to see that access to that file. Here, that ability to really say, I'm only giving the person who I'm sending the email to, just simply without having to add anything from a encryption or rights management on top of that, it just works, and that absolutely increases the security. That does complicate things from an eDiscovery standpoint, though, because one of the other things that we have to consider is, where are the actual files? They're no longer, if I'm collecting from you, we have to think about that, because I might be referencing a file that's on my side that you actually don't have access to. So that's one of the things that we'll talk about, because it does complicate things when we're talking about cross-organization.
And I think that's why they've been kind of ignored. It is tough. One of the reasons anyways. And, another reason is like, we have a lack of specific guidance from the ABA on how to handle modern attachments. And in some rulings, and we've referenced some of the rulings, you can read more about it in their handout, but, it's like, well, this isn't really an attachment. And, Rocky, this, it's like, why isn't this an attachment? Like, well, when it was sent, is that when I send you a file, so I send Scott a file and I say, hey, have a look at this. And then he looks at it and then he changes it. And so if I went to collect that file today, the file would look as it looked last modified if I were not to, if I only collected the latest version. So what is the correct version to collect for litigation, right? So that's
absolutely.
It's a complex question. I mean, and I know that you've written articles on this, Rocky, and it's really something to think about, and kind of really made me think a lot about, yeah, exactly. What is the right version to collect? And the answer to that is depends.
It depends. Right? Like everything else, it depends. So, yep.
Yeah.
But let's dig in. Let's dig in and see some of that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about, I think what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, preserving, like what you should do and what you should think about, right? So let's talk about preservation.
Yeah.
Modern cloud productivity suites, Google, Microsoft, they have the ability to preserve data in place, right? So what we used to see and what we see a lot today, and I think you might be able to concur, Scott and Rocky, is that we were preserving email a lot, right? And that was great when there were only like real attachments, because then you would get the attachments. But yeah. So what about today? Would you get the actual, like, Rocky? What are your thoughts? I mean, do people think about that?
So the first thing is that, from a custodian perspective, and we'll talk a little bit about, care and control from a custody standpoint, but the first thing is where is this data, and whose data actually is it? So I already made reference to the whether it's within your organization or outside your organization. That absolutely complicates things. But even within your organization, the first thing is you need to make sure that you are preserving the locations that the user has access to and utilizes, that where they may be sending these types of attachments from. So in a Microsoft world, that would be their OneDrive, SharePoint sites that they have access to. It's the different locations that are by default. And most people do think about those types of things. But you also have to be thinking about, how do I go out to the other locations? Because, for example, if Scott had shared a file with me, just shared it, didn't send it even as an attachment, but he just shared it with me, I could actually include that file as a modern attachment that's sitting on his OneDrive. And if he's not a custodian in this case, I would never think to go ahead and preserve that. So I do have to think about the different locations that this data could be. There are tools, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that you should be looking for in tools that can trace back locations and give you reports on what you may need to do from preservation and different sources. And again, it can depend on, first of all, the definition of care and control and custody, and is that file that Scott sent me something that would even come under the hold preservation that applies to me. And then there's the questions of really, when I'm preserving it, what am I actually preserving and how am I preserving it? And that gets to especially on the version control, because again, up until 6-7 years ago, a file was a file, and it existed in the storage, and that was the version, and that was it. And if you wanted to go back, then we had the entire question of backup tapes and snapshots and all of those other fun things that we've been dealing with since the early 2000s around, do I need to go to the backup tapes? Do I not need to go to the backup tapes in order to get the different versions? Well, now, by default, Microsoft preserves versions in OneDrive. It's based off of a corporation's actual settings within their SharePoint and OneDrive environment. And they could be preserving 50 versions. They could be preserving 200 versions of these files, 50,000 versions of these files. I mean, you can have every single change that's happened to the file can be tracked. So I delete a word, I add a paragraph, I add 3 pages. Then those prior versions, do they need to be preserved or not? And by default, a lot of the tools out there will go ahead, and when I put a file on hold, it will automatically lock the versions and turn off the auto deletion of older versions, but not all the tools will do so. So you do need to look at your preservation and your auto deletion settings and make sure that when I'm actually preserving in place, that I am preserving all those older versions. That's probably one of the biggest things that can impact the actual, and it's not truly about modern attachments. It's just about changing data that exists on that storage. It gets complicated when we talk about it in the context of a modern attachment, because now all of a sudden I'm referencing that file. I'm not just saying that this is the file that I'm preserving. So I do have to look at it and make sure that I'm tracking back to where those file locations are. But at the very least, in today's world, if you're putting a custodian on hold, even if it's just a general, you're looking for email or you're just looking for chat, you probably do have an obligation to put their direct storage on hold, because that is where most of those online or modern attachments will be coming from. So I think it's very hard to argue that you shouldn't put that data on hold.
Yeah, or like a relevant SharePoint site, for instance. Maybe if it's a sales related litigation, you'd want to put the sales share, just like you would as a network share, put it on hold. And we're not collecting here, right? We're just holding it, we're preserving it. And so, I mean, we always, there is a cost, okay, a storage cost that is related to storing a lot of data. I mean, that's definitely a consideration, but in general, people do have allocated storage for legal hold, and if it's not too large a litigation in general, putting it on hold is not going to be too costly, and then you'll have it if you need it. Just remember to remove it when you're done with it. But the thing that Rocky mentioned about the version retention, I mean, you could have like how many versions of a file do you have? You could have 15. You could have Rocky said 50,000. I was like, holy. Wow, like that's a lot.
Generally, you won't have 50,000.
No,
there's almost no one who has it set, super high. But but it is possible that you could have thousands of versions. Yeah.
And I think that's so checking your version retention. So what that's the IT guy or person, sorry, at the organization. It's that should be a question. If versions are important, if things that happened at a certain period in time, what is the retention policy for your versioning? Okay, so you want to make sure that you get what you need. So I think that, The only other thing is like we're talking about preservation filters. We don't recommend doing keyword preservation filters. We usually at most date and location. And would you agree with that, Rocky?
Absolutely. On a preservation side, you do want to be a little bit broader here and make sure that you're not missing anything, especially because, again, various different tools work differently in terms of the platforms, Microsoft, Google, et cetera, but some of them will not actually search the prior versions. It'll only search the most recent version. So you need to make sure, unless, and some of that changes once it's on hold, then it may search the prior versions. But prior to any legal hold and preservation in place being placed on these files, many of the tools will not actually search back through all of the versions. So you do want to be extremely careful about using filtering, keyword filtering on the preservation side. Collection, different story. But on the preservation, for sure, you want to go a little bit broader.
Well, that's a great transition. Let's talk a little bit about collection considerations. There's.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rocky.
I was just going to say, so we've already made reference. There are different tools out there, and it could be the platform itself, meaning you're using Microsoft Purview, you're using Google Vault. And they work differently, and you need to be aware of exactly how they're working and what they're doing. But there's also a lot of other eDiscovery specific tools that are out there that work with Microsoft or Google or other assorted platforms in order to do those collections. And they have various different capabilities. Some of them will automatically track back to the top level attachment. So, if I've got a Word document that was attached to an email, then it may actually go out and then collect that Word document wherever it exists, and maybe it'll attach versions, and maybe it will not. But then what if I have a reference to an Excel file inside that Word document? Will it actually go ahead and reference that one and pull that one back? Some will, and it'll go down to various different levels. Some will not. So you really have to dig into the specific tools to understand exactly what the capabilities are for actually collecting these types of attachments. And yeah, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
These are things that would have to be considered when you're coming up with your ESI protocol, right? You need to understand how your system or your client system is working and what those parameters are, so you can make an agreement to get what you can actually get. And if you can't get something, make sure that's in the ESI protocol. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Well, and it's also knowing just like what tools can do. And that's, when if you're not 100% sure on every platform, like if you have a trusted partner that can help you with that kind of thing, because, to know what to ask for, like, many people may not know that there's an eDiscovery tool that will get the different versions or versions within versions, et cetera, et cetera. But if you know that and you need that, you can request it. I think that's it's becoming more and more reasonable. It can definitely be argued. When we are looking at a case with our clients, it's definitely platform. It's like, well, what do you want? Like, are there any innate abilities within your platform that can get us what we need? Secondly, like, does your licensing support that? So, I mean, like in Microsoft, for instance, you have an E3 license or a kind of a mid-level license. You can do a eDiscovery export and collect all day long, but you're not going to be getting your modern attachments. You need to have an E5 for that, right? So it really does depend on not just the platform, but the licensing within the platform. But even if they don't work, they're like, for ourselves, we have our own tools that are proprietary that collect, modern attachments from Microsoft and Google, even when they don't have those correct licensing, if you will. So there are workarounds, there's ways to do it, and tools out there to kind of get to what you need. I think the big thing for here is like collection is like, do you have to collect the modern attachments? And again, do they matter? Do you have to collect the versions? Again, does it matter? Because versions, we have one file So generally, I mean, not 50,000 versions, but there could be, I guess. But it's a lot, eh? Like, it's a lot. Sorry, I threw an A in there.
Yeah.
But, you know, you want to kind of think about that carefully. If you're collecting, you may start with, you know, getting the contemporaneous version. I said it before anyone else could.
Good.
But that's the
You
one
win
that
on the bingo card.
I do. Yeah. That's the one as it exists at time of collection. Do
But what does that?
maybe you won't.
But what does that actually mean, Sarah? Let's actually dive into that for
That's
for
a
a
great
minute,
point.
because
Let's define that.
That's the version as it exists at the time of collection. So, you know, if I collect today, then it'll be the version as it exists today, not the version as it was when it was sent necessarily, or when it was modified. So it may not be the relevant version. So you
it
have
might
to,
not be
you
the
know,
right, and that's a question that I think has been asked but has not been clearly defined, and I think it does
what's
somewhat
the right version?
depend
Right.
of what is the actual right version. Because you know, I send you something, you're on vacation, and you know I continue working on it for a week. By the time you actually get back from vacation, the first time you see it, it's 17 versions later, but that's the first time that you saw it. So
What if you never see it?
or
Right.
if you
Right.
never see it, exactly. So that you might need to go to the audit and, you know, determine that you never saw it and what the timing of it is. But absolutely, there's, you know, that I think that question of the never saw it is the same question as any email and attachment. You know, who says that I saw it or did or did not read it. But here again, it gets even more complicated, because the first time that you do see it, it might be a totally different document than at the time that it was actually sent. And by no one's trying to be malicious here or trying to do something wrong. It's just the nature of how these files now work. So it could be very different.
Yeah, 100%. Could be completely changed, you know, so the knowledge you had on the day it was sent, if you had you looked at it versus the knowledge you would have had you looked at it 3 weeks later, might be very different. So
Yep.
you really have to think
And
about your matter, right?
exactly. It's
Yeah.
the does it matter, right? It's the do I care who knew what when for this case, or is that irrelevant to the specific matter? And that's
Right.
going to be one of the big questions that has to be asked when I'm considering exactly what and how I'm collecting it. So,
100%.
In terms of processing and review, modern attachments present their own challenges. What are some of the challenges that we have with processing and review of modern attachments?
So again, there's a lot of different processing tools out there, and how they process and what they do during processing can make a difference. You know, I might actually collect the modern attachments, but does that collection and does the processing tool post that collection know that they're associated with one another, that the file that was here on OneDrive is that file that was referenced in the email? Some tools, yes, some tools no, and that's one of the big questions that can impact exactly how it's processed and how it's reviewed. You know, some processing tools will leave a reference that it was a link, and some of them it'll just show them as a attachment, and you know, they're referenced just the same way as a standard attachment is, and you may never know that it was a modern attachment. It just looks like it's a file on the email. So it really can make a difference in terms of knowing, do I need to investigate this more? Do I have all of the information that I need here? Or is everything correct? You know, that's one of the big questions that needs to be asked. The other thing from a review, and I'm going to go back to my my original Equivio roots, is near duplication can become very, very important here, especially if I'm collecting versions. And okay, let's not go to the 50,000, but I have 30 versions of this file. I do want to make sure that, because I don't want on the email for it to necessarily show me that there were 30 attachments, because there weren't 30 attachments to this email. But I do want to be able to reference the different versions and see the timing of those versions. So that gets to another point, which again, going back to the which version is right and which version do we want to show as the actual attachment, depending on your settings. A lot of the tools will look at the timestamps or look at the versioning, if that's available, of what was referenced and actually associate that specific version. But you do want to be able to pull up all of the other versions of that file, especially if they're newer versions, since the time that is, or the one that's actually referenced on the email. So near duplication can become really important here to be able to associate all those files together. Yeah.
Near duplication, definitely. And, we also, when we know when the relevant date range is, if there's a particular time period that you want to kind of isolate, that's another great way to kind of isolate those versions, kind of narrow it down as well. So in some matters, that's what we'll do. Some matters, it just says, just let us know, like, tell us there's a modern attachment and associate it like a real attachment. So we'll do that. But I mean, if you know the relevant range you're looking for, if you want to see like, I want to know if like this relevant range and if they were modified in a certain range or modified by a certain person or that kind of thing, like those are things that all can be done with that kind of elevated metadata we're talking about. So it really can get you to if you think about all the things that a document can give you, times and dates and who did what when and what you're looking for, that's when you want to say, to your partner, like your trusted partner, saying, hey, can I get this? Can you find this? Can we identify that first? So that you can kind of like, maybe get pointed to the right documents more quickly. So I think that's that was one of the reasons why we wanted to do this webinar, is the CLE, is to just kind of talk about that. Is like, I want my, our clients to know, and people that we work to, people out there to know, like, these are things you can do. So if you know what you're looking for, be clear to, your providers and your partners, or, know yourself that you can find these probably in a more kind of poignant way, in a more efficient way.
Yeah, and someone on the chat had asked a question, or had pointed out that there is some case law here, in regards to what may or may not be required. I do want to I don't want to dig into the actual specific case that they're referencing, but I do want to point out two things that, like always, and any time that we're talking about case law, is that in general, the case law that is being mentioned here is specific to that case, right? It's not necessarily precedent. It's not necessarily saying that this is the way that it should always be done. It was a point in time. So the technology, first of all, that was over a year ago. Technology is, as we know, is rapidly changing. The capabilities are rapidly changing. But also that was specific to, in that specific case, which is the Uber case, was specific to Google and Google Workspace. And some of the ways that the data had been collected, and what the impact of that was, and what the capabilities to do anything with it past it, which is not necessarily the same of, first of all, today when you're collecting from Google, or when you were collecting from Microsoft, depending on what your capabilities were, or tools that vendors may have at their disposal to be able to actually do things in an automated fashion. So
I think
that's a long-winded way of saying, sorry, Sarah.
No, I was just saying that ruling basically illustrates your point, because, they had to revise it, 6 months later, because they're like, hey, you can't do that. There's no technology that, that does that. And now they're saying, yeah, actually it does. Now they said 10 documents a week, which is kind of crazy, but.
Yep. And
but,
again,
it proves your point.
Yep. So again, don't take just because someone's throwing out a specific case in case law, that does not mean that is, first of all, what has to be done. We know based off of jurisdiction also, but it's a point in time capture for that specific instance. And that does not necessarily guide exactly what needs to happen in your case as you're dealing with some of these challenges. So just putting that out there.
Well, let's get to it, and let's look at let's put this kind of knowledge into action. We have a little fun. use case.
We have a little,
You may find this familiar.
We've had some fun with this on the webinar. Hopefully our attendees are familiar with the movie Erin Brockovich, featuring Julia Roberts and Albert Finney here. And by way of background, the story is about PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, that was discharging hundreds of millions of gallons of contaminated water that was contaminated with chromium-6, which is known to cause, it's a known carcinogen. The story goes, decades later, in 1993, Erin Brockovich became a legal clerk who investigated the health effects that this contamination caused the people of Hinckley, California. In her work, if you remember the movie, and some of us are old enough to remember the day when you were working with paper documents. So Erin Brockovich was working with paper documents, looking for memos, letters, environmental reports, and things of that nature. And the way that she went about collecting those documents and reviewing them was unorthodox, Sarah, to say the least. But what we wanted to do was explore what would happen if Erin Brockovich was looking for those files in a modern day environment with cloud attachments. Sarah, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I just go to the next slide. I rewatched this movie last week to kind of remember, all the little facts. And, kind of at the big clincher of the case was like, okay, the local branch of PG&E knew they were contaminating the water and did nothing. But what Erin really needed to prove was that the corporate office of PG&E was aware of this contamination and did nothing. And so in the movie, their case kind of rests on this creepy guy coming up to her in a bar, having like hoarded some documents in his basement or something, and had that he was supposed to have burned. And those were some key pieces of evidence. So in the movie, that's what it was. In real life, I'm not exactly sure that's how it went, but let's say, this was the case. So you want to find these documents that show the corporate office knew. That's what the key is. So what if that were today? And so that's what we're going to kind of look at today. Let's get into it. So we're going to look for, if you want to go to the next slide, the smoking gun PG&E documents that were shared internally as modern attachments, the remix, right? So let's go, let's see what we got here. So let's say they were shared. Okay, just go to the next slide. There we go. Shared like this, like in a Teams conversation. This is how we're talking these days. Could have been a text message, could have been Teams conversation, could have been an email. And they get the environmental assessment report. And so we here have Del Vance sharing the report through a Teams message, asking her CEO and fellow executives to have a look at this report. So let's have a look at the report. So go ahead. Yeah, so this is, say, the original report that was sent in the Teams meeting. So this is the version that it was when it was sent. And so it says here, okay, chromium-6 concentration exceed the EPA recommended safety limits in multiple testing sites. Does that make sense? So this is what we're looking for, right?
And the subject line here is specifically calling out that it was elevated chromium-6 levels in the testing. So right. It's pretty obvious. This is exactly what we need.
Increased likelihood of serious illness and cancer. Okay, so let's look at what it is today. So this is the contemporaneous version. This would be a document that had been modified. So we collected today, and it says all the Hinckley site and everybody else, they all reported that the results were in acceptable ranges set forth by the EPA. So all's good, nothing's need to be done. Executive team is off the hook. That's what we would collect. So one of the things we mentioned earlier, about keyword searching, you search for hexavalent or chromium or whatever, you could find it with EPA, but you wouldn't find it with those terms. pollution, that kind of thing, contamination. So I think that that kind of leads to our point about, you don't want to be running these keyword searches because you're not searching versions with keywords in most cases. Does that make sense? What else?
Yeah.
So let's go to kind of, let's have a look at, what we would or wouldn't do to find this document. Okay, so how and could she have found that evidence? All right.
Yeah. Let's dig in. So what could she have done wrong? That's the first question. What are the things that she could have done here that would not have necessarily worked to help her to actually find that evidence? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is if she just put out a legal hold. She didn't actually preserve anything. She didn't forcibly preserve in place or do anything like that to actually stop necessarily the auto deletion or anything like that. Well, guess what? That old version potentially is gone, and we will never actually find it. And in a lot of tools, if it's not on hold, then it won't actually even search that, even on the later search, not for preservation, but the overall search. So that is one thing that you absolutely need to not just verbally or send a written notice about the hold, but you actually have to take action to preserve them. There's really today no good excuse why, if anyone's using any of the modern tools, modern platforms for productivity, meaning Microsoft M365, Google Workspace, even Slack and some of the other tools now some of them have the ability to actually preserve and to make sure that data is not going to get deleted. So that's number one. Number two would be if she went ahead and actually preserved, but only did the email itself and never actually captured that OneDrive.
Right. Yeah. The messaging. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, there are, again, some tools now that will go out and when I preserve, it'll lock in those actual files. Just as an example, one of the things that Microsoft is moving towards is a custodian or user-based storage. So when a file is shared, then it may potentially get stored in a hidden folder for that user. So that way it'll still get preserved even later when that file or when that email or that Teams message in this case is put on hold. So there are things that can be done potentially, but again, you need to look at the actual tools that you're using to see exactly how that works. In general terms today, if you just preserve the email, it is not going to preserve that actual file that's sitting out there in OneDrive.
But it is a good point. Some may say, one could argue, well, if it was the 6th Tuesday of 2024 and the sun was in retrograde, whatever, Venus was in retrograde, maybe it would have saved it, because there are circumstances where and even today where a shared version of a file will be found within your data, the custodian's data, but there are certain things that have to happen. So if you want to make sure, that you actually are preserving the sources that you may think that the data resides in, right? So that's just being sure. Yep.
Okay, so let's keep going. If she used keywords, as Sarah pointed out, there was no mention of EPA, there was no mention of Chromium 6, all kind of the standard keywords that they may have submitted and may have agreed upon. Chances are it would not have found it in the current version of the file, so that never would have gotten preserved and therefore never would have gotten collected and therefore never gotten reviewed. If they didn't do anything to try to find the modern attachments, then that file would and if they again only did the email, that file that's sitting out there on OneDrive would never have gotten collected. And if they didn't collect prior versions here, then they never would have seen that there was a prior version in existence that did specifically call out that there were problems. So what could she have done right? Sarah, you want to walk through that?
Well, I kind of basically all that stuff. She preserved the SharePoint, the OneDrives, and so that was a Teams message, right? So Teams conversations are saved in one's mailbox. the file was in Adele's OneDrive, so that though they were put on hold, that was great. She used only date filters instead of keyword, so that's great. She, used her, together with her vendor, she used the eDiscovery tools to collect these modern attachments and the correct versions, and so and then identified all relevant versions for review. I think that's all those things would have led her to this. Doing this, there are ways to do this, and then this is very broad, okay, right? We're just using a particular case here, but, there's ways to kind of get, the data, and yes, she would find it, but perhaps it would be overly burdensome. There'd be too much data. So, depending on your size of data and what you're looking for, and how many versions you have, you may want to take those extra steps, as we mentioned before, and cull it down to modifications. Only show me ones that were modified. Only show me ones that these people were involved, because we're looking for leadership, maybe we say certain people in leadership, did they modify anything, that kind of thing, or identify any emails that were sent from Hinckley to anybody in the corporate office, and identify those, only get the versions for those emails that are shared. So there's like strategies you can kind of implement. If they're preserved, they'll be there if you want to kind of go back to the well, but start with something that's palatable, that could possibly lead you to the right place more quickly.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, so we just wanted to kind of, we've kind of gone over all the different kind of best practices. I think that, we want to just kind of circle it back and say, and this is in the handout as well, so there are more than one ways to kind of approach a matter, and you don't always need to get versions and get all of the modern attachments and all that, but when it's important, attachments are important, then this is important. If who did what when is important, then this is important. And work with, or get get smart on, inform yourself on the different ever-changing technology that is available and ways to kind of perform these actions. And if you're not sure, then talk to somebody who does know. Like you can always reach out to me, and maybe Rocky, I don't know, I'll let you say that or not, but I'd be give you happy to give you. He's not really kind of in this game much anymore, except for on the AI side. So reach out to people that you think might have good answers for you, or you could help you with your strategy. It's not as straightforward as it used to be with the emerging technology, and this is going to get more complicated before it's less complicated, I would say.
Yeah. I would add also a couple other things. So the expert point is absolutely essential here. Don't try to bluff your way through this. It does get complicated. You need to have someone who actually understands it and is up to date and can actually answer, not just based off of, well, I looked at it a year ago and this is what it did, so therefore that must be what it's doing today. Right. I would add in two other pieces. One is the audit logs. So it's something that's rarely discussed in terms of collections and preservation and all of those things, but both Microsoft and Google do offer pretty detailed audit logs that sometimes you do have to go back to them, because like Sarah was talking about, the metadata and being able to know who knew what when, and being able to see who opened the version and who closed the version, who saw it at different times, who edited it.
Who shared it.
While some of that who shared it, a lot of that information is only available in the audit logs. Sorry?
I'm sorry, Rocky. I just wanted to mention, Sarah, is that a good use for the Seemly application to review those audit logs?
Yeah, these logs have proven so effective and at solving or finding key data and investigations that we actually built a platform called Seemly to kind of look at these logs and kind of narrow in on kind of activities, because they are hard to look at in their native format. It's a lot.
Yep, but, and it's a ton of information, and you'd be amazed at what's contained in there. Many times IT doesn't want to give anyone else access to it, because it is the keys to the kingdom of understanding what's happening within an organization. But at times it does become essential to a case to really truly be able to show who knew what when and who looked at data at different times. And then the last piece that I would raise from a strategy standpoint is negotiate. You know, like in the Uber case where they did negotiate those, 10 hyperlinked documents per week till the end of fact discovery. Whether that makes sense or not, whether that actually is the right option, but it's what they were able to negotiate out. And it's really important to know what your actual capabilities are, and then negotiate from there to be able to limit your exposure, whether you're on the plaintiff side or on the defendant's side, to be able to say, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do, this is what we are going to agree upon, and getting those negotiations in early, and potentially having them change throughout the process. Again, the technology is moving fast. For anyone who's not aware of that, just look at what happened with the Microsoft Purview eDiscovery platform in the last 2 weeks. All of a sudden the UI changed, functionality was added, functionality was removed. I mean, this stuff is absolutely changing, not in a way that we've ever been used to before. It's rapid change, mostly for the good, but sometimes for the bad. So know what you're getting into and be ready to negotiate based off of that.
Yeah, and I just want to let me piggyback on that for a second. Sorry, but technology wise, okay. So, many of you may be thinking that's too much data with all those versions and finding stuff and whatever. And we talk about technology, like I have to say this because Rocky's company Altorney just came out with Mark AI, which actually will look at like a huge exports from Microsoft 365's eDiscovery, and you can actually interact with it and cull it down using generative AI. So this is like something where you could actually really kind of interact with the data pre-review and cull it and pinpoint the things that you need. So the technology, if you think that this would be great, that it could do that technology would do something, it probably does today.
Yep.
We have a few minutes left in the hour. I'd like at this point to open it up to questions from the attendees. Do we have anybody in chat?
Been quite quiet. You guys still there? If not, though,
everybody's on and attentive, from what I can tell. This problem is only going to. The challenge with hyperlinked files is really it's a cloud issue, right? As more people move in, I mean, most businesses I think are in the cloud already, but there are some who are still doing things on-prem. The problem is only going to get larger, or the challenge will get larger and larger as the move to the cloud completes. Is that accurate?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, this is.
I think the challenge is going to grow, but also the solutions are growing as well. And that's key. Is that both from a platform perspective, but also from a vendor software and vendor solution perspective, we're getting more tools out there that really do make this easier. So challenges are getting harder, but also the tools are getting better.
100%.
Never a dull moment in eDiscovery.
No. Well, thank you, everyone.
Always something to challenge us. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I want to thank Rocky and Sarah for a really compelling conversation. I want to thank everybody for joining. If you have if you're seeking CLE credit, be sure to reach out to Deirdre. Her email will be in the chat. And if you're with our friends at the Orange County Paralegal Association, they will be sending you an email asking you for certain information so they can get you the CLE credit. Thanks again. This has been really wonderful. I appreciate you guys joining us and giving us your insights.
And thanks to the OCPA, Orange County Paralegal Association, for sponsoring the California credit. We really appreciate it. Yep. And hi to all my friends from the OCPA.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.